So one specific topic that I want to speak to you about today, which I think is super, super vital, and it's actually something you hear everyone kind of, be confused about, discuss about, which is all these ideas about detachment and enlightenment, and what that all means, and how to detach, and even the word like enlightenment, people tend to give it all kinds of meanings that they like to give it themselves. But I want to speak about the idea of enlightenment and the idea of detachment from the perspective of mainly the Yoga Sutras and Buddhism. And those two paths, some argue that they're very different. One of them is dualistic, the other one is not even dualistic nor non-dualistic, but this is more what scholars begin to see, and then they begin to see the opposites. But actually, if you look at it with a bit more distance, you see that they are very, very similar. What Buddhism and Yoga Sutras both do is they speak about a path, they speak about a possibility to become completely and totally free from suffering and delusion. Totally, totally free. Zero suffering left. That's what they speak about. I've never met anyone that I think had zero suffering left. I'm not sure. Maybe some older monks in Buddhist monasteries, I could, but they are not allowed to speak about their spiritual states. That's interesting, by the way. Buddhist monks are not allowed to say that. I can imagine maybe one or two or three of them that I met that might actually be pretty free of any suffering. So this is what these scriptures speak about, the total end of suffering, the possibility for total liberation. And now a funny thing happens, because then you have modern yoga practitioners, go to a yoga teacher training, for example, get as one of the first two books to read the Yoga Sutras, and then they get told, this is what we practice. But that's a path that speaks about full liberation and complete and total disentanglement from each and every attachment you have. Because attachment creates suffering. If you don't get what you are attached to, you have pain. That's quite simple to understand, right? Kind of the difference between profit and loss, between popularity or loss of popularity, between praise and blame. Right? These are all kinds of things that kind of feed into these attachments. So now how many people get divided is seeing these very high goals, the possibility for total enlightenment, picking up these teachings and trying to practice it. Maybe even claiming that they are practicing it. This is my text, I follow yoga. But then in reality, I only know people that practice this, that also have relationships, that also try to live a nice life with a holiday here and there, that like good food, that do their passion projects. So clearly these people are not yet interested to completely let go of each and every attachment. They are enjoying all kinds of attachments. They sometimes suffer when they lose their attachments. So we are kind of split there, because we have to detach, but we're also kind of not doing that, but we're also kind of doing that in some way. You have other extremes too. I fell in this extreme a lot, which is that, one of the key terms that you find in yoga, and not just in yoga, actually also in Vedanta, another philosophical school in India, is vairagya. Vairagya means dispassion, often translated like that. And it teaches you to become dispassionate about things you were once passionate about. So, like things that would normally absorb your attention, you're like, nah, not interesting for me anymore. Let me come back to presence. Let me go back to my breath. Let me abide in consciousness. And what you then have is a spiritual practitioner that is kind of living in the world, still doing all kinds of worldly things, as that you cannot escape when you live in the world. It's going to require you to work and interact with people, and you're not escaping anything. Or you're not escaping many things, let me say it like that. But you're trying to detach from everything you see all the time. I've done this a lot. I've practiced this. Let go of that thought. I desire something. Release that desire. Let me meditate, let me meditate, let me meditate. Let me be in my center, in my center, in my center. And so what you then create in people is a split. Because they are holding now two orientations, whether they're conscious of that or not, they're having two orientations in their mind that are both following at the same time. The path of detachment and liberation of suffering, and the path of simply living a worldly life. So how do you bring the two together? Because, I think one super beautiful way to look at spirituality is that you realize at some point that you have inner conflict, that you are divided inside, that you have different parts in your mind that are conflicting with each other, that are talking to each other. And spirituality, you could see, is all about becoming undivided. But so many people that practice, the foundation of their very practice is one of being divided. You see what I'm trying to describe here? So we have to do something about that. I believe. I mean, it can go quite well in many ways. Many people kind of do this intuitively. So we're shining a light on something we are already doing intuitively. Many people already kind of detach from some things and kind of keep attaching to others. So I think a good first point to start is to not get confused about what Buddhism and the Yoga Sutras say. Because a lot of people like to interpret them in a way that fits the way they like to live. So they kind of like to pretend like what the Buddha says is kind of like something half attached, or what the Yoga Sutra says is kind of like worldly. But it's good to understand that this is not what they try to do. They are quite metaphysical in some way. They actually just state not necessarily a dogma or like do this, but they are saying it is possible to become totally enlightened. In other words, it's possible to become totally free of suffering. And in order to achieve that, you will need to address these things, because there is a cause to suffering. And we're going to explain the cause in these teachings so that you can successfully remove it. So we have to see these teachings more like a truth. And then we have to really see, if we want to engage with them, that what the whole purpose is of what these traditions are laying out for us is to describe us the path to release yourself from suffering completely. So that's a good starting point. This is what they try to do. They don't say, you have to do this. They're not dogmatic about it. They simply state the truth. So if we want to engage with them, with these high truths that are extraordinary, that people found them out, is to see them for what they are, and then to see that we are not on that path. We are not aiming for total release from suffering. Maybe we will someday. Maybe some of us will become a monk someday. I've questioned that myself many, many times. I think no more in this life, but who knows? So if we are not going to become a monk and do this fully, we have to look at how are we then going to engage with them. And this will be a matter of looking at these teachings with a somewhat open and at the same time critical mind at what really applies to me. And can I work with this actually if I'm not going for full liberation? And I would say the answer is very much yes. But it's so important to it's not so honorable to engage with these teachings, trying to bend them without having acknowledged all of this, what we are just now acknowledging. That's like that if we chant a mantra to honor Patanjali, the writer of the Yoga Sutras, but we are not even fully acknowledging what he's trying to tell us because we've bended it to what we like it to be, we are not really honoring Patanjali. So it's very important that if we want to honor these teachings, we understand this and now we move forward. And now, how are we going to move forward with them, living a life that includes things that we are passionate about? Which the path to full liberation doesn't include. It's not about your personal passions. I see Joanna laugh. It's quite comical also, actually. Yeah, it is comical. So I have some ideas about this that I'd like to share with you. And we are now we are walking a path of using these teachings while living a life with passions. So we are going to use teachings on detachment and dispassion only for some parts of our life. But clearly you are not going to, if you have a romantic partner or you have a child, you are not going to choose to be dispassionate about them. Right? That would be horrible. Imagine you practice to be dispassionate about your own child or partner. That would be very, very sad. So this is one place where you're not going to be dispassionate. And isn't that beautiful also? So the inquiry that I would like to look at is, what are the things that we find so beautiful about this worldly realm that we say, those I won't detach myself from? And what are the things that we say, that is truly a cause of suffering, that is unnecessary, that is not noble, that is not a dignified way to live, and therefore I will detach myself from it. And I would almost be tempted to write like a new spiritual philosophy where you again make a system out of exactly what is now a good desire and what not. But I think it's also important for people to kind of fill this in for themselves, to think about that quite deeply, and to really reflect on that. So this is I said I invited to bring a journal and a pen. So a nice reflection to reflect on is, what are the high and noble desires in my life that I will choose to be passionate about and cultivate and attach to? And on the other hand, what are the things I put in the box of detachment, release? And what will I apply my Yoga Sutra and Buddhist meditation and mind training techniques on to weaken them, if they are, if those are my chitta vrittis, if those are my mind fluctuations, if those are my patterns. Yeah, and I might repeat this point again. Because what's sadly happening for many people is that when they don't reflect on this, as I said, I did this for a long time, and many people do this, they kind of continue to detach from everything, or sometimes from everything. Other times they stop detaching from everything, so they sometimes feel that they want to go after their passion, after their dream, and then life gets hard again, and they think again like, oh, I should go to a cave and meditate, and I shouldn't attach myself to things because see, it hurts. But then the cave is also kind of boring, and they kind of go back, and it's like this back and forth and back and forth. You are not doing anything fully. It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing. And I can share also a little bit more from my personal experience, because when I meditated without having so much knowledge yet of scripture, which was the first 4 years of my spiritual practice journey, I read some basic books, I heard some basic lectures, but I was mostly meditating, and I was having very powerful insights and breakthroughs with that. And with those breakthroughs, my heart very much opened, and with my heart, creativity came, and I saw so much possibility, and it literally felt like the world was, I could just kind of do anything with my life. Anything was possible, and there were so many amazing visions that came alive, and I was buzzing with electricity from these meditation retreats that I was going to. But then when I started to, for the first time, read Yoga Sutras, and I started to engage more with Advaita Vedanta, which is very much about this passion, I began to think that there was something wrong with that heart energy, that heart creativity. And I began to practice to let that go, and let it go, and let it go, and let it go. And ever since, I have often lived in this half split. And more I'm realizing, and I'm seeing it all around me, that we have to become a lot clearer on what we try to detach from and what we choose to keep in our life. A lot clearer. Because this could be, how we kill our greatest dreams, our greatest creative energy, our greatest relationships. So what are your passions that you already have? What are your attachments that you already have that you want to give a place in your path, that you don't want to choose to detach from? And there's an important thing that we need to also take into consideration here. Because choosing intentionally to not detach from those things you're passionate about, that is an act of courage if you fully realize what you are doing, because it means that you will be taking emotional risk. If anything that can fail, that you can lose, and that you choose to engage with, keep in your life, means you are choosing to take emotional risk in the case that you would lose it, in the case that it would fail. I know some of you here are wanting to grow in your maybe journey as an instructor or a teacher. Well, that's risky, because things might not work out the way you want it. I know many of you are in relationship. Well, that's a risk. Your partner can leave you, or even if there's a lot of trust, they can become sick. Some of you have kids. Taking kids is an emotional risk. So it's profound to include that also in the contemplation of what attachments you will keep, what attachments you will choose to not detach yourself from. That comes with emotional risk. And there's a kind of empowerment in that, because now when things go wrong, you can say to yourself, I've chosen that. I've chosen this experience. I didn't want to go like that if something goes wrong. That was not what I was expecting or trying to go for, but I chose for that. I once heard a monk say something very interesting, a Buddhist monk, about why our society, one of the reasons our modern Western society is sick in a way that many Asian societies aren't sick. And that is because Asian societies, for example, especially a country like Thailand, for example, where he lived for a long time, Thailand, Buddhism is very, very alive. It's very much part of the culture. People grow up with monks going on alms rounds around them. There are Buddhist temples everywhere, and people know that you can choose to leave society behind, to practice the teachings of the Buddha that promise liberation. And so you know that if, shit hits the fan, if you cannot bear the suffering of daily life anymore, you have always that option. And you see the monks, many of them are quite happy. So right now I don't want that. There are too many things I like in the world. And you will hear many Thai people also speak about it like that. They will be like, wow, I wish I could do that. But, it's so amazing that these monks do that. But I kind of want to stay here in this worldly life. But so they're very aware that would always be an option for them. Now go to the USA. Think of someone living in the city, isolated, working a job where people are absolutely not interacting with each other from a state of a lot of passion or love. The food they eat is horrible. They live in a small apartment and they have video games around them or whatever, and Netflix, and they are just depressed. And there seems to be no way out. They don't know that there are other ways to live, and they don't know that there is such a thing as the possibility to go for spiritual enlightenment. Well, this kind of person will start to contemplate suicide because they don't know that there's a proper way out. So it's very beautiful to realize that if we are really feeling that this world is not worth to live in because of the suffering that is there, that there is a way out, which is a beautiful and noble way. It's to become a monk and to devote your life to spiritual practice and opening your heart completely. That option is always there. And it's even more beautiful, actually, if you know that possibility is there. Total happiness, no more suffering. But you find life in the world worth it. You say, it's hard, but it's also beautiful. I like it here also. I want to stay here fully. And these kinds of contemplations bring us into that undividedness. Wherever we are, we choose it fully. I choose to attach myself fully. I choose fully to practice the Yoga Sutras only half. So what is it really worth to suffer for? What is it really worth to suffer for? And what is it not worth to suffer for? So as I said, the journal contemplation here is to begin to kind of rank desires. And then we can speak of something like high and noble desires and low inferior desires. Longing, deep heart yearning and longing to have certain experiences of purpose, of connection, of presence, of love, of intimacy, of union with the divine. Or lower impulse to have an immediate sense gratification because you are bored or you're agitated. Lower desires fueled by fear, greed, anger. To take revenge on someone is a desire. Well, that's not a very beautiful thing to do, for example. Objectifying lust. That's not a very high desire. Immediate sense gratification that is uncontrolled by a deeper awareness. That's not something anyone is super proud of when they engage with that. Does it make you feel full? But now, to practice the release of low desires, and having acknowledged what the Buddhist teaching and the Yoga Sutras are telling us, they still are profoundly useful, so full of wisdom. They really teach us how to do that still. Indeed, we're not taking them all the way to liberation, but they really show us the ways to train our mind. They really show us the way to release thoughts, to concentrate the mind, to tackle situations. Simple sutras, right? Like the Yoga Sutra on when you have a negative thought, shift it into a positive thought. It's a very simple sutra. That's mind training. If that happens during the day, you could say a negative thought would be to eat a tub of ice cream 5 minutes before bed. And the positive thought would be to see yourself thinking like that and to say like, no, I want to feel good tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is another day. And so I will restrain this impulsive desire for the sake of feeling good in my body tomorrow and feeling healthy and revitalized for my sleep, which won't happen if I eat a mountain of carbs and fat just before I go to bed. Or you are in a heated moment with a colleague, a friend, a partner, and there's the possibility is presented by your mind to now say something mean to them. The mind is thinking something mean that's almost ready to come out. That's a negative thought. Positive thought would be to see yourself doing that. To say, that's not a road I want to walk. I want to treat people with love and dignity. How can I say something again to connect? Or how can I calm myself down? So this is one of the ways we shift our mind. And the Yoga Sutras and the Buddhist teaching are full of helpful tips to do this. Full. So I don't want to give you too exact journal prompts, more broad questions. So what do you feel are lower desires that you would want to learn to detach from, as I already mentioned? What do you feel are higher desires that you will fully choose to engage with without practicing these dispassion teachings. So what desires will you fully embrace? In other words, what is it worth suffering for? What am I willing to take emotional risk for? And I think it's also very important, and maybe I will begin to round it up here. You know, from a Buddhist monk's perspective, I refer a lot to Buddhist monks because there are far more Buddhist monks than Yoga Sutra monks. They don't really exist like that, Yoga Sutra monks. They are kind of like they're monks that practice all kinds of Vedic teachings and also yoga teachings, but Buddhist monks are more, you know, that's just some more reality. And from their perspective, and we could all say that we all are moving towards happiness and we all are kind of moving away from things that make us suffer. And so if that is really what humans are kind of doing all the time, from the perspective of a Buddhist monk, it is kind of nonsensical to keep engaging with worldly life if the option of Dhamma, of Buddhist teaching, is presented to you. Because that says, if you do this, there's complete release of suffering, and that's what you want. So from their perspective, it is a little bit like anyone that's not fully practicing the Dhamma is a bit confused. Because everyone wants happiness. Here is the path to full happiness. You know, but people are kind of still attached to the things in the world. So that's their perspective. That's interesting to see. You know, we can look at it again from our perspective otherwise again, but this is how they look at it. And that's also interesting to bring into our contemplation. Why, if I believe that there's such a thing as total liberation, why then do I not go for that? Why do I keep going for life in the world? I have many answers to that. Maybe I shouldn't give them. Maybe I should let you think only about that by yourself. But there's something, for example, I would say this is very metaphysical to think about it like this. It's quite logical and practical. But there is also, and a Buddhist might not agree with what I say, this is why they do what they do, but there is something also like your heart. And somehow it doesn't feel fully right in many people, their heart, to leave this world behind and to go become the monk. For a lot of people, their heart tells them something different to do. And these teachings, that's not a criticism. I think we should be careful to be critical of them, but this is something they sadly don't help us with. How to then follow your heart. There is not one mention of your heart in the Yoga Sutras. It's just not what the teaching is doing. It's a bit sad, maybe. I was speaking to my philosophy teacher a month ago, and maybe some of you watched the conversation I had with him in the Himalayas next to the Ganges. You can find it on my YouTube channel. Anyways, somewhere by the end of the talk, I said to him, a thought I sometimes have is that the Yoga Sutras kind of misses a fifth chapter that speaks more into the heart. But it's just really not Patanjali's goal. He's just speaking about the truth of suffering, just like the Buddha did. It was not their goal to address that. It was their goal to tell you how to fully liberate. That was their sole orientation. Yeah. But yeah, so why do not go fully into that complete liberation path? Because somehow our heart tells us otherwise. My heart keeps me here. And I think all our hearts are keeping us here for now. Although I suspect Zoran sometimes to maybe ever contemplate to become a monk. So, yeah, I will round up my talking here. As I said, I'm very happy to hear you in a moment. I I really enjoyed to come together like this, and I got a bit of a. I always get fuel injections in India of inspiration, and one thing that really got strong here for me this time is, which I already mentioned by the beginning of the call, is the importance of contemplation together, because we can read about it, we can hear about it, we can think about it, but it's so important to come together and to reflect out loud on these questions. What does this mean? How does this apply to me? What do I think about this teaching? What does my intuition say about this? How does the Kundalini symbol speak to me? How does the symbol of Shiva speak to me? How will I practice these things that interest me? This is just super important to do out loud. This path is a path of pranayama, of movement in asana, of meditation and stillness, but this is also a path of reflection and contemplation. Huge part of it. And so I'm looking forward to do that more in these regular meditations.